Did I say? I said I went through all the chainsaws, and now we're having a Sunday afternoon wood cutting party. This is what we do on our day off. Right, Victor?
Yes, sir.
We gotta get up before breakfast tomorrow. You don't like it?
See, when they cut away. This is what I got.
I don't want to run out.
1 or 2 is
Don't want to run out of wood. I'm going to do a demo here on the side graft and try to get some close-up shots and talk about the cambium layer and a little bit about knives and how to make this thing work. So, here we go. I'm going to show you 2 knives here. This is called a side knife, and that's for making that slide on the side of the limb. This is called a sign knife, and wouldn't you know it, that's for cutting signs. And this is a sign. That's about a 6-inch length of wood with 3 buds exposed after the graft is made, and the cut that we'll make on is about 2 inches long. On the bottom end there, sign, S-C-I-O-N, sign. Okay, a couple of these out here. So this knife, this big one here, is about $100 Hinkles when it starts out, and Hinkles is the best German steel that I've been able to buy ever, and it's hard enough to hold an edge all day with a little tune-up now and then, and yet soft enough that you can sharpen it and it won't be brittle. And I chopped the end of them off and snap that off, and then put this thing on a belt sander and grind it down until it's got the correct thickness and the correct bevels. And this is also a Hinkles boning knife, and I use this to cut my signs with. So then these go through a series after on the belt sander, you go through a series of stones until we get them worked out, and then finally they wind up on this razor hone. And this is what the barbers use to sharpen their razors with. And sometimes they use a razor strop and to align those edges. So these knives are very, very sharp, and that's what you need if you want to be a successful grafter. Okay, I'm going to try and set this camera up over here and show you a little bit about this. Well, the other day I tried to do a demo on this side graft, and I didn't do a very good job. I got in a hurry and distracted, and then I didn't have what I needed in frame. So I'm going to give it another shot this morning and see how I make out. I was trying to show how to cut these signs and how to and point out where the cambium is. If I can get this camera just right, well, maybe that'll work right there. It looks pretty good. So I can slice about 1.5 inches long on that, and these cuts are angled so that when that flap opens up on the understock, that this sign just fits in there just ever so. Now I'm going to try and point out the cambium on this, and this cambium layer is, if I can see, get this in frame, cambium layer is a little tiny line. It's less than the width of a pencil mark. It's tiny. And it's not out here on the edge of the bark. It's down here. Okay, here's the edge of the bark. It's down here inside between the bark and the hard wood. And it's a 1-cell layer where all growing takes place. It's the definition of the cambium. And you know, when we were kids, people my age, we were taught in school that you could cut down a tree and count the rings, until the age of the tree. And that cambium layer is what makes that ring every year. That's where all the growth is. So this little tiny line is just minute, and that has to match up with the same tiny little line on the tree. And what happens is, in this cambium layer, it begins to produce calcium tissue, which is just undifferentiated cell growth. And if you ever see a tree that's been bumped and knocked a little place, or the bark's knocked off a little bit, or pruning cut, you'll see a ring around that cut. And it's called a calcium ring. That calcium tissue, and it heals itself up so that wound does not start to die and rot and die back into the tree. So it formed this calcium ring here. This is undifferentiated cells, and right in that cambium layer, and it builds up a ring of that calcium tissue, and that's healing tissue. So those are just undifferentiated cells. But if you connect this cambium with living cambium on a tree that's taking up nutrients, these cells will begin to differentiate into vascular cells, which sends energy to the bud, and it starts to grow. Now, the tree sending up nutrients causes the cambium to be active on the tree and begin to produce these calcium cells, or calcium tissue. And the stored carbohydrates in this signwood also causes this end to begin to produce cells. And when those cells merge, that's where you get the vascular system that allows it to take up nutrients from the understock up into this piece of wood and force this bud to grow. Now, I'm going to try to get my camera set up here so I can demonstrate the receiving slot for that. But I want to point out just how straight these cuts are. If you can see, that cut is just as flat as the blade of that knife, just as straight. That's what you need, is a nice straight cut, so you don't have any air pockets in there. And what happens if you most people starting out tend to make the mistake of holding the knife like this, and what happens is you scoop that cut, it'll scoop out like that. And I'll cut one wrong just to show you that, because if it scoops out, what you'll have when you insert this sign is an air pocket. You can see through there, and if that pocket happens to be where you're trying to touch this cambium on this with the cambium on the tree, you're done. It won't grow. And it has to be a tight fit and right up against that little tiny mark of cambium. So these cuts have to be straight. And in order to do that, you don't want to lay that knife down or stand it up so it scoops. I tell my guys, it's not an axe, so don't chop. It's a knife, and you want to slice. So you lay it down and make that slice. And you have to hold your arm and wrist. Your wrist can't move. That has to be rigid. And you shoot a line right through your arm and right out through your elbow. And I always tell these guys, when they're learning, just make believe that your mother-in-law is standing right there beside you, and you go, bam! Boy, just catch her right in the chops, you know, right in the chin. And you'll learn to make a straight cut. So I'm going to try and get this camera set up and see if I can demonstrate the slot on this side graft. Okay, I think that's going to work. I put this guide on this knife, and that just helps give me a place to guide that knife so it goes straight. And that needs to be one cut, one straight cut. You don't want to seesaw that knife to try to get it down through there, because you'll hack up that cambium layer inside. And it's rough. If it's rough, you won't get a real nice fit. And you can hear that go in. You can hear how tight that is. And I'll get the camera here now and point out where that cambium cross is. If you look down in there, you see that I have the tip out a little bit on that side, and then I've rocked it back so that you can see some hardwood. And you can see that cambium line, and you know somewhere between here and out here, somewhere in between here and here, somewhere you cross that cambium, and that's what it takes to make it grow. Another thing you don't want to do, people make, guys, when they start working for me, they'll take this tape and they try to roll it off the roll on there, and it's never going to be tight that way. So you just want to tear a piece off and lock it down and overlap it a little bit so you have no windows. You don't want any cracks in there to get paint down in that cambium layer. It's also, I mean, it works two ways. It supports the graft, but it also keeps that paint out of that cambium layer, that cross where we crossed it way down here in the bottom. So there's a little demonstration of the side grafting. Of course, this will all be painted up, and you always got to paint the tips, or the sign will dry out and the buds won't grow. Anyway, that's a little demo there. I'll graft an apple tree with a side graft. Thanks for watching.